Hello, viewer. Happy 4th. You may say Independence Day, I say 4th. I don't know why. I was raised in Canada, so this next installment I didn't learn a whole lot about, and by not a whole lot, I mean none at all. We spent an entire semester on how we burned down the White House before actually Canada was really a country. It was technically still a colony. The point is, the Civil War is more interesting. We have David Barton of Wall Builders here, and we'll be doing an installment today on the Civil War and maybe some of the most common misconceptions. Thank you for having us.
Sure, man. Good to have you here.
This is a Civil War drum, correct?
It is a Civil War drum. It
Okay.
is. Mm-hmm.
Is this a Civil War camera?
That goes back to that time. This is the kind of camera they used from Civil War days going into the 1920s and 30s.
Wow.
So it would have been the kind of stuff that Brady would have used later to take pictures, famous pictures of Civil War.
You should put that on Etsy.
Yeah. I wonder what we get for that. Yeah, that's exactly.
Someone would probably just think like, oh, that's quaint. That looks, it almost looks original. And you have a lot of artifacts here from the Civil War. I guess let's sort of kind of walk people through the Civil War. A lot of folks say, and you hear this argued a lot, the Civil War really didn't have anything to do with slavery.
Right.
It was about economics, and it was about states' rights, and that's kind of, we look back on it more fondly thinking it was about freeing the slaves.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Well, I kind of like to let the documents speak for themselves.
Okay.
And so when you look at the Civil War, you had 11 states that seceded to become the Confederate States of America. And so these 11 states, when they left the United States, they all wrote a document of secession on why they left. Mm-hmm. And by the way, all of their congressmen from those states gave farewell addresses on the floor of the House and Senate that are public record. Anybody can get them. Constitution requires us to keep records of every speech made. So that's public record out there. So if you take the secession documents of the 11 states telling the world why we did what we did, every one of them says it's because of slavery. Every one of them.
Really?
Now that's the Southern documents. That's not a Northerner or anybody else. And I'm from the South, but that's not anybody else saying, "Oh, you guys made it about slavery." They're the ones who said that, without exception. All 11 said slavery's the issue. Now you could say, "Well, it was economics." That's true, but the backbone of your economy was slavery.
Right.
And so that was economics. But you yourself, in your secession document, you're the one who said that we left because he's trying to end slavery. It's interesting. We often hear the Civil War is about states' rights, and the federal government is trying to tell the southern states what to do.
Right, and as Federalists, as conservatives, that's an argument that would appeal to us to a degree.
And so we think that it was all about states' rights, which is interesting that in the Confederate Constitution, to be a member of the Confederate States of America, you are not allowed to end slavery. You had to maintain slavery. That's part of the Constitution. So if it's all about states' rights, what are you doing joining a group that won't let you have the right to decide what to do with that issue?
That's a good point.
So it really was about slavery, and that's made by their Constitution. Their vice president.
Also legalizing pot. They were ahead of their time. That was really big,
That was a big issue back then.
Missouri, really big
right,
on legalizing weed.
Well, that's a border state. It was really the deep southern states like Alabama and all those states. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So they really had this thing of slavery was the issue according to them, according to their political platforms, according to their own constitutions, and according to their secession documents.
What about according to, we have this, I can touch this, correct?
Yes.
Because I feel comfortable because it's very laminated. According to this man, Abraham Lincoln, if he could have kept the Union without ending slavery, and a lot of people say that that's what he would have done. He felt that it was necessary. So would he have done that? Would he have kept slavery?
Well, I see that the whole argument all the way up to that.
By the way, it looks a lot more ethnic than you usually think of Abraham Lincoln when you look at that. I mean, he could be Native American, he could be, I don't know, he could be Ukrainian, Uzbekistanian.
Yeah.
The point is, it's not Daniel Day-Lewis from The Crucible.
Not.
Okay.
It is not. So with Lincoln, leading up to all those years before the Civil War, through the abolition debates, there was no clear consensus that the Constitution prohibited slavery. That pretty much left it to each state.
Right.
Now, the Founding Fathers, they thought, when they were doing the Constitutional Convention, they all agreed, if you give us 20 years, we're going to end slavery, which is why they put the date at 1808. So 20 years after the Constitution was written, they thought they could get rid of slavery, they could ban the slave trade and be done with it. Even the pro-slavery states.
And why did they want to do that? Who would be included in those Founding Fathers who wanted to end slavery?
Well, it's interesting that when we did the Declaration of Independence, the longest single grievance in the Declaration was written by Thomas Jefferson, and it said, "We have been trying to end slavery in America and the King won't let us." Because in 1773, you had Rhode Island and you had Massachusetts and Connecticut, you had Pennsylvania all do anti-slavery laws. And in 1774, the King said, no, you're part of the British Empire. We have slavery. You're going to have slavery. So at that point, founding fathers like Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush and others said, this is not right. We've been trying to free our own slaves. We don't like slavery. We don't want it.
Right.
And so you'll find that 41 of the signers of the Declaration owned slaves. It's not a question of how many owned slaves. What did they do once they had the right to end slavery? So when we separated in 1776, you'll find that so many of those guys freed slaves, said this is what we've been waiting for. This is why we want to separate from Great Britain. And so the largest grievance in the Declaration is Thomas Jefferson saying, we've been trying to end slavery and they won't let us. Jefferson had been introducing anti-slavery laws in his own state. His state would not allow him to free his own slaves.
Right.
Not just the British, but his state. So what happened was...
Was it Jefferson or was it Washington who freed them at the time of his death?
Washington freed them at the time of his death. There was a loophole in the law that was added in 1782 to Virginia law that said, okay, we want people to be free, so when you die, you can free. But even when you die, you can free your slaves. They never allowed you to free what were called dowry slaves. And dowry slaves were the slaves that came through the wife. So Martha's slaves, George Washington, you can't free Martha's slaves. You can never free a dowry slave.
Wow.
So Jefferson, by the time it came to Jefferson, the legislature said, what were we thinking about? That was a bad loophole, so they closed the loophole. He didn't even have that loophole at the time of his death. So what happened was Jefferson wrote this anti-slavery piece in the Declaration, and he wrote, because the Declaration says the unanimous declaration, they all agreed that the only thing we'll put in the Declaration is what all 13 states agree on. Jefferson said South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia would not agree that slavery was a big issue. And so we had to take that clause out.
Right. So the Civil War was a long time brewing. It didn't just come out of nowhere like a lot of people think.
But those 3 states thought that if you give us 20 years, we can be away from slavery. And they probably would have been, because slavery is economically unprofitable.
Right.
What kept it alive was 1803, the cotton gin comes in, and now a slave can do what 10 slaves used to do, so now I can make money. So it changed the whole economy. Slave economy changed, but there was the belief that by 1808 we can get this done in America.
So, and before we move on, what are these here? I see some...
These are all Civil War...
Oh, and by the way, sorry, I should have said, this is actually the picture that was used, right? That they used...
That's what they used to build the Lincoln Memorial. That is the picture that was used for that, and this is the negative that was used for that picture.
The photo negative of Abraham Lincoln.
Now you're looking at what looked at Lincoln,
wow,
essentially. So all of this, so all that to say that at the time of Lincoln, slavery was not a settled constitutional issue.
Right.
Because the Constitution didn't ban it. So his job was to take an oath to uphold the Constitution,
yeah,
which he would have done that if slavery had to be required. He hated it. He was against it. He spoke against it. But when it became clear after the split that I can't save the Union without ending slavery, then that's where he went.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.